As a leader, if I'm trying to build a company of people who all bring their uniqueness of spirit that we discussed when we were talking about purpose, and you want to discover what a company's purpose is, it's the people who are together that give a company its purpose, that really energize that company's purpose.
So now we are definitely growing into having companies with folks that are online, in person, in different countries. So cultural nuances and differences that leaders need to be aware of in creating an environment where everyone's needs are met. Not saying that the leader's job is to make everyone happy, but what are some of the things that we need to be looking at now to create this environment that's rich and value-driven based on what others have to bring to the table?
That's an important question. If one truly wants to be global and inclusive, then one has to set about it in a particular way, and we'll describe that in a moment. And one has to make that decision. Do you really want to be that, or do you want to be more singular cultured? That's not the fashion today, but it's certainly easier to say, look, I want to hire people like me, and I want to work with people that I feel very comfortable with, and that's what I want to do. And that's one kind of a business, and it has its advantages and its disadvantages. But today there's much more of a need and a desire to be culturally global. By global, I don't mean that I have an office in every country, but I mean that I have people from all over the world, and not necessarily even people geographically from all over the world, because what makes people diverse is not so much where they come from, but where they're going to. That's what makes people different. You could have a person that comes from Hong Kong or from China or Japan, and you could have somebody who comes from Germany or France, and you could have somebody that comes from Brazil or Canada or Mexico. And the fact that they all come from different places is significant. We can talk about that. But what's really important is, where are they all going? If they're all going to the same kind of place, then they're not that diverse. If they all went to the same schools, the same colleges, got the same kind of education, they're not really that diverse, even though they might look diverse. And I've always taught that diversity isn't about how different people look. It's about how different people see. If you've got two people who might look very similar, but they see the world very differently, that's diversity. Often, looking different and seeing differently will go hand in hand. Often somebody who's grown up in a village in China or a village in Africa is going to see the world very differently from somebody who grew up in New York City. There's obviously an impact in terms of where you come from and how you look. But you could have a group of people who look very different. You could have an African American, you could have an Asian person, you could have a white American woman, and they all come from New York City, and they all went to the Ivy League schools in New York City, and they all went to similar sort of high schools, and maybe even lived in similar parts of New York City. They're not diverse. There's nothing diverse about them. And yet you could have 2 or 3 white American males who are incredibly diverse, who see the world very, very differently. And I think there's been this trend of checking the boxes of having diversity in terms of people that look different. And yes, there's perhaps a higher chance that if I employ people who look different, that I will be employing people who see differently. But one can't take that for granted. And now we have to design our global company in a way that includes people who see the world differently. And what might that look like? So, for example, there are people who see the world through a lens of structure, and they need things to be clearly defined and black and white, and they need rules, and they need hierarchies, and they need strong legal systems, and they flourish in that kind of system. That's how they see the world. That's how they experience the world. And then on the other extreme, you have people who see the world relationally. They don't really care about all that stuff. How are we getting on? What's our connection? And what levels of trust are there between us? So the structural person might say, I don't need a high level of trust because if you step out of the structure, I'll sue you. The relational person will say, what? Sue me? Why would you ever do that? Can we not talk this out? Can we not figure this out? And so a relational person will feel, taking this example, incredibly insulted by the thought of legal action. Structural person, that's just the way you do business. And then you have people who are ideological, who see the world through a lens of purpose of why are we doing it? What is this for? So if you can imagine 3 of these different people planning a vacation together, the one might start off saying, well, let's decide when are we going? Where are we going to? How are we getting there? What are we willing to spend? What's our budget? That would be the structural person. And the relational people will say, who's coming with us? What kind of fun are we planning to have? And how are we going to optimize that? And where are the parties? And what kind of restaurants are we going to visit? And the more ideological purpose might say, let's just agree why we're doing this first. What is this for? What do we want out of this? And they're just 3 different ways of going about that project. But we see that in business all the time. And business, certainly in the United States, is traditionally very structural. There's a need, if one is going to become globally inclusive, to find ways to incorporate the brilliance that the other lenses bring to solving a problem. But with it does come conflict and does come tensions. And of course, the issue of remote work and adds just another layer of complexity, which we can talk about.
So let's talk about the complexities that have arose, after having folks that were in our offices, they were right there. We knew exactly what they were producing. They also had connection to others. They were teams that were collaborating in person. And since then, we're now working from home, sometimes coming in, and there is also isolation, productivity to look at. How can one, now that things are somewhat stabilized, get some sense of order so we're taking care of our employees? We are also collaborating, and we're still getting that productivity, because I can tell you my first belief was folks are going to work from home. How are we going to engage how much they're producing? And I think that really it's a mind shift. It's a belief system that we grew up with, or we've been practicing to having to shift. So what are some of the ways that we can shift from that one way of being to this global cooperative respect and trust into the workplace?
The first thing I think is we've got to shift from managing people's time to managing people's output. And so that's elevating people to a much higher level of respect. If I'm managing your time, I'm assuming that you don't know how to manage your own time. If I'm managing your output, then I'm simply aligning your skills and capabilities and time to our needs as an organization. There's nothing disrespectful about that. So we need to be able to come to a point where I don't care how many hours you're working. It's irrelevant. What I care is what value are you adding. And if you've developed ways, because you're smart and efficient, if you've developed ways in adding enormous value by working for an hour or 2 a day, it shouldn't bother me in that level. There's another area where it does matter. So in terms of people working remotely, we've got to make that shift. In making that shift, we're beginning to treat people like almost an external resource, an outsourced resource, as almost in a consulting capacity, a provider rather than an employee. And that's important to negotiate with the employee, because it's very hard to treat somebody as a core employee when they're remote. People aren't designed to be alone. People are designed to live in community. And our families are little communities, and we do well in social communities, living in the areas around us. And work is also a community. And we flourish in community. And that loneliness that you mentioned is something that is affecting people. There is the type of person, the very introverted type of person, who thrives on working alone and getting on with their job. And they don't want people. They don't need people. So you've got that type of person. But then that type of person needs to accept they really are operating as a provider, as an outsourced provider, being paid for their output, not as part of a core team. Because to be part of a core team, you've got to put something in as well. I often say to the people who favor working remotely, that's fine. I understand it works for you. And I understand that you're able to add value by working remotely, and the company is able to pay you for that work that you added. That's all good and fine. But there's another element to building a company, and that's the culture and the values of the company and the energy of the company, the human energy of the company. How do you plan to contribute to that? And the truth is, if I'm remote, I can't contribute to that. And I need to understand that I'm opting not to contribute to that. Now, if I'm remote just because that's a choice, the office is a few miles away from our house, but I prefer to work from home, that's one kind of scenario. And we can overcome that by spending a certain amount of time in the office. if one is remote because we are truly a global company and I've got people and talent working around the world, then I've got to accept that my business model is not one of a company. Company means companionship. You can't have companionship online. If you've already got a strong connection, then I believe people can maintain that connection remotely with a little bit of the addition of getting together once a year or whatever. But if you don't have one, if you just joined the company, if you trying to build a relationship with a new client or with a new partner or with a new friend, it's very, very difficult to do that remotely. People can date remotely to a certain point, but they've got to meet each other. And I don't know what the numbers are of how many relationships end when they meet each other. It's just not what they thought it would be. A large number of relationships are successful. They manage to meet online, to get to a certain place online they would never have met any other way, and they're able to then pivot and convert it to a real face-to-face relationship. And it's the same in business. So if one starts in a company remotely and one stays remote and one's never really part of that company, you have to accept that you're an outsider. You actually are providing work to the company, and that needs to be okay for you. You're your own business, providing value to a company, and they're paying you for the value you do it in your own time, in your own place. But as a leader, if I'm trying to build a company of people who all bring their uniqueness of spirit that we discussed when we were talking about purpose, and you want to discover what a company's purpose is, it's the people who are together that give a company its purpose, that really energize that company's purpose. So one needs a combination of people who are really at the core, who spend a lot of time together, people who are not so much at the core, who spend some time together, and people who are on the periphery, who already are providers and don't need to be there at all physically, and they can do it all remotely. And we have to be able to satisfy the needs of all three. Understanding that there are people who need a high sense of belonging, and there are people who need a high sense of autonomy. It's very difficult to have them both unless you are a founder, you're an entrepreneur. If you start your own business, you're autonomous and you have belonging. You hire a group of people and you hire a team, and the team grows, and you have a sense of belonging that here's this company you've created, and you have autonomy because you're the boss, you created it, you can come and go as you like. But if you're not, if you're an employee, you've got to trade one for the other. You want more autonomy and less belonging, or more belonging and less autonomy. And those are new conversations that companies need to have with their employees. If it's going to be more autonomy, we might pay you in a different way. Your leave might be different. Your share options might be different. If you want a lot of belonging, then that's a different kind of contract. We have to be flexible enough to create employee contracts that are agile and are themselves diverse. You can't hire diverse people and have a standard employee contract. You can't have a diverse people and have a very standard fixed culture. There needs to be fluidity to be able to manage diversity.
If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website, YogiPatelTTE.com.